Hey y'all, my name is Bree Fairley and I'm a speech language pathologist at Atlas Aphasia Center. Today I'm going to be talking about reading with aphasia and specifically why those small words are the worst. And for this video, I'm really talking about reading out loud. A lot of people think that reading in your head and reading out loud are the same thing, but they're not. A lot of people with aphasia, if you give them a piece of paper, the visual processing center of their brain will look at those written words and connect them to meaning. Whereas when you read out loud, you've got to go a couple extra steps. You have to use that visual processing, connect it to meaning, then connect it to a word which has different sounds, which have to be in the right order, and they all go to your motor cortex so they can come out of your mouth. It's like a lot more steps. It's harder. So just because someone can read in their head doesn't necessarily mean they can read out loud. Plus, like we all know, right? You hand me a piece of paper and I'm going to do a little bit of skimming. I might not read every single word. My eyes are going to kind of run over the page and get the gist of it. Whereas when you read out loud, you have to read every single word. So it gets tricky. And when you have aphasia, it is really hard to say those small words. So if you show somebody with aphasia a word like this, or this, or this, I'm not saying they're easy, but they're easier. Even though they're longer, they're multisyllabic, they look trickier. A person with aphasia will have an easier time with those words compared to something like this, or this, or this. Right now, all the people with aphasia are like, oh my gosh, preach. Because for real, these are the hard ones. They're really tricky and they seem like they should be easy, and they're not. They're really hard. And it feels ridiculous. Like a lot of people are like, how did I get out this word that's got 9 letters and I can't get out this word that's got 2? But it does kind of make sense. So let's get into it a little bit. So they're what we call content words versus function words. I don't care if you get all technical. I don't care if you know the names of everything, but essentially, right, like a content word is something you can kind of picture in your head. It's got a lot of information with it, whereas a function word usually just has sort of a grammatical relationship with the rest of the words. You need a lot more context, and our brains very rarely have to process them in isolation. So they're trickier, they're a lot harder. And if we go back to this example, right, we see that word, again, visual processing part of our brain sees that written word, connects it to this thing, right? So we have that idea, we have that picture in our head. Even if, right, so far we've just looked at it with our eyeballs, we have not yet come up with the word, pretend that you have aphasia. You see it, you know that it's this thing, you have that in your head, but you can't quite come up with the word. Well, at least your brain has a lot to go off of, right? It's thinking about this object. It's maybe like digging into some memories that you have with this object. You might start thinking about breakfast time and doing the crossword and sitting there with your orange juice and your cereal, right? And you have this thing in your hands and it's like your brain's kind of narrowing in on what it is. Whereas if you look at this word, it's not able to kind of narrow in on anything because it's just looking at it like, what's that thing? What is that? It doesn't really like have a strong picture or a strong memory or something that you can go to in your brain to help you. It's just like, I don't know. I don't know. What is that? Right? So that's what makes it so hard. And sort of in general, this is a blanket statement. It's certainly not true for everybody or for every word. But typically, nouns tend to be a little bit easier. Adjectives, adverbs, verbs, kind of somewhere in the middle. And those small words, those function words, tend to be harder. And that's because over here on the easier side, things that are concrete, imageable, so you can really pull up a mental image or a mental picture, and stuff you use a lot. That's another part of it. It's like if you use the word a lot, then it's going to be easier to access. Whereas over here, They're very abstract. They're not imageable. You can't really have a good picture. You do actually use them a lot. So I wouldn't say this really comes into play for these small words. That might be for some other types of words, but these ones are going to kill you, right? Really abstract. Can't really form a picture in your head. So that's what's going to make those so much trickier. Great, Bree. Thanks for telling me that that they're harder. That's a thing I already know. What are we going to do about it? So let's look at this word. This might be hard to get out. Just this, you're like, okay, yeah, I know, like probably you're thinking of what it refers to, but it might not be easy to get that actual word out of your mouth. So we are going to make some use of homophones. And that is a word that you say the exact same way. Even though it's spelled differently, you say this the same as this. So this thing is an I, and this word is I. Same thing. You say them the same way. I. Right? So what I want you to do is to try to kind of connect those two ideas in your head, because this thing is at least a little bit easier to have a picture of and have something for your brain to reach for. Whereas if you just have this all by itself, I don't know, that's kind of tricky. So we're going to try to pair them up with something that's a little bit easier to picture and a little bit easier to kind of connect so that you can get that word out. So this is an I, this is I. Same thing. Let's do another one. This might be kind of hard to get out. Your brain's probably going to make something up. You're probably just going to spit a word out at me because your brain's trying to help, but I don't know. Did you get it? Did you not? This is the same thing though. So let's look at this picture. It's a can. You say this word, can. They're the same thing. So I'm not saying that this one is easy necessarily. It might be hard for you to think of what that's called, but at least it gives your brain something to reach for, right? You can have that mental image. You can connect those two things. You'll probably have to drill a bunch. You'll probably have to practice. You'll probably have to do flashcards. But if you can think of this thing and give your brain like a picture to think of, hopefully you can get this word out. So again, this one is can. All right, let's do one more. Can you say it? I don't know. Probably a little bit tricky, but I bet if I give you this, a little bit easier. You say them the same way. So we've got a picture of a bee, and you say this word, bee. Same thing. So if you can connect these two in your brain, right? Again, practice. It's not just gonna like happen overnight or because you saw this one time. You know how aphasia works. But if you practice, if you get some flashcards and you kind of connect these two ideas in your head, hopefully when you see this word and you can't think of how to say it, you're like, oh, it's the same as this thing. What's that again? And then at least your brain has stuff to search for, and hopefully it can get out that word B. All right, so if you think this might help you, stick around and watch my next video. We will go over each of these words and maybe share this video with somebody who doesn't get why those small words are so hard, because there is a reason and it is real. Thank you guys so much for listening and keep up the good work.